The distress beacon had been screaming into the empty darkness of space for 3 days now, and Commander Lisa Grant stood in the command center watching the tactical screen with tired eyes that had seen too much fear and too little sleep. Below her, in the reinforced sections of Kepler Station, 3,000 colonists waited and prayed and hoped for something that logic told them would never come in time to save them. The station shuddered again as another wave of plasma fire crashed against the failing shields, and Lisa felt the vibration through the deck plates under her boots and knew they were running out of time. Lieutenant Jake Morris called out from his position at the sensor station that another volley was incoming, and his voice stayed calm even though everyone on the bridge could see the fear in his young face. The shields flickered and dropped another 8%, and now they were barely holding at 42% capacity, and the Vitheli fleet that surrounded them like hungry wolves showed no signs of getting tired or bored or merciful. The Vitheri had come 6 days ago with 12 warships that looked like daggers made of dark metal, and they had sent one simple message to the station demanding immediate surrender of everyone and everything. Lisa had heard the stories about the Vitheri, and everyone in human space knew what happened to colonies that surrendered to them. The reptilian warriors would take the strong ones for labor camps and take the resources and take everything worth taking and leave behind nothing but empty stations and stripped planets. 17 star systems had fallen to them in just 10 years, and now they wanted Kepler Station because it sat in the middle of a rich asteroid belt full of rare minerals. And the colonists who had spent 5 years building a home here were just obstacles to be removed. She had refused their demand without hesitation because death fighting seemed better than slow death in their camps. Earth was 16 light years away, and even if someone had heard their distress call the moment it went out, even if someone had immediately sent help, it would take weeks for ships to arrive through the jump gates that connected human colonies across the vast distances between stars. Lisa had done the calculations 100 times, and every time the answer came back the same, which was that Kepler Station stood alone. The 3,000 people here were miners and engineers and families, and farmers who had come to build something new, and they had basic defensive weapons, but nothing that could stand against 12 warships, crewed by warriors who lived for conquest. Chief Engineer Paul Stevens appeared at her side with his uniform covered in grease and coolant from the desperate repairs he had been running for days without rest. He told Lisa quietly that the shields would fail completely in about 4 hours, and he had rerouted every spare bit of power he could find, but they were running on empty now. Lisa nodded and felt the weight of command pressing down on her shoulders like a physical thing, because these 3,000 lives depended on decisions she made in the next few hours. She had already given the order to move everyone into the core sections where the armor was thickest and where they might survive a few minutes longer. When the Vitheri finally broke through, Jake announced that the Vitheri commander was hailing them again, and Lisa straightened her spine and told him to put it through. The view screen filled with the scarred reptilian face of Commander Thraktal, and his yellow eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a predator who knew his prey was cornered. He spoke in the common trade language that most spacefaring species used, and his voice carried contempt and amusement. He told Lisa that her shields were failing and her weapons were nearly depleted and no help was coming, and he was tired of waiting. Surrender now, he said, and he would let the children live as servants, but refuse, and he would crack the station open like an egg and take what he wanted from the wreckage. Lisa met those yellow eyes without flinching and told him that her answer had not changed since he first arrived 6 days ago. Kepler Station would never surrender to him or his empire. She saw something flicker across his face that might have been surprise, because most species gave up when faced with certain death, but humans had earned a reputation for stubbornness that bordered on insanity. Thraktal's lips pulled back, showing rows of sharp teeth, and he promised her that she would die slowly and painfully along with everyone else on the station. The transmission cut off and left Lisa staring at the empty screen. Paul muttered something about how well that conversation had gone, and Lisa almost smiled despite everything. She ordered him to seal the emergency bulkheads and prepare for boarding actions because if the Vothuri were going to take this station, they would have to fight for every single corridor. Paul hurried away to organize the civilian defense teams, and Lisa turned back to the viewport where she could see the Vothuri ships moving into a tighter formation like a noose slowly closing. Beyond them, the stars shone with distant cold light, and somewhere out there was Earth and home and everything they had left behind to come build a new life on the frontier. She thought about green hills and rain and the sound of her daughter's laugh from 5 years ago before the cancer took her and before Lisa had volunteered for this distant assignment to escape the memories. She thought about humanity scattered across 23 colonies and building and growing, and trying to make something good in a galaxy that seemed determined to crush anything soft or weak or kind. The Votheri thought humans were easy prey because they preferred talking to fighting and building to destroying, but Lisa hoped they were wrong about that. Jake's voice cut through her thoughts with sudden surprise and confusion. He said he was picking up something strange on the long-range sensors, and there were multiple jump signatures forming at the edge of the star system. Lisa felt her heart skip because Votheri reinforcements would mean the end came even faster. She asked Jake if it was more Votheri ships, and he stared at his console with his fingers flying across the controls and his eyes going wide. He looked up at her and said negative, and the signatures were human drive signatures, and there were a lot of them. Lisa asked how many, and her voice came out rough. Jake checked his readings again, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing, and then he told her 43 capital ships and 67 escort frigates and the UA's Valiant, which was Admiral Helen Crawford's flagship. The entire command center went silent, except for the hum of systems and the distant rumble of another plasma bolt hitting the shields. Everyone knew that name because Admiral Crawford had never lost a battle and never abandoned a colony and never backed down from any fight, no matter how bad the odds looked. Lisa felt something rising in her chest that she had not felt since the Votheri arrived, which was real hope. Jake reported that the Votheri fleet was breaking formation and repositioning to face the incoming human ships, and Lisa could see the pattern changing on the tactical display. The viewscreen crackled and Thraktal's face appeared again, but this time, Lisa saw something new in those yellow eyes that looked almost like worry. He told her that she had friends coming, but it would make no difference because he would destroy them and then destroy her. Lisa smiled, and this time she meant it. She told Thraktal that he wanted to know what happened when someone threatened human colonists, and now he was about to find out because that was Admiral Helen Crawford approaching, and the Admiral did not appreciate bullies. The fleet emerged from jump space in perfect formation like a wall of metal and fire and purpose, bearing down on the Votheri position. 110 warships had just dropped into normal space, and they had come to answer a distress call from people they had never met on a station they had never visited, because that was what humans did for each other. The most feared armada in human space had arrived, and the Votheri were about to learn a lesson that would echo across the galaxy for years to come. The bridge of the UES Valiant hummed with controlled energy, and Admiral Helen Crawford stood at the center of it all, watching the tactical display with eyes that had seen 37 years of war and peace and everything in between. She was 59 years old, with gray streaking through her brown hair that she kept tied back in a simple knot, and she wore her naval uniform like a second skin because the Navy had been her life since she was 22. Her officers moved around her with the precision of people who had trained together and fought together and trusted each other completely. Captain Danny Price stepped up beside her and reported that all ships had completed the jump transition and the formation was holding tight. Kepler Station's shields were down to 38% and barely holding, and the Vothari fleet consisted of 12 warships that were now turning to face the incoming human force. Helen nodded slowly and kept her eyes on the display, where 12 red markers represented the enemy and 110 blue markers represented her fleet. The Votheri had a reputation for heavy armor and aggressive tactics, and they usually won fights by being more brutal than their opponents, but they had never faced the third fleet. Helen ordered communications to open a channel to Kepler Station and asked specifically for Commander Grant. Lieutenant Nicole Sanders at the COM station confirmed the channel was open, and Lisa Grant's face appeared on the screen, looking exhausted and relieved and trying not to cry. Helen kept her voice professional but not cold and told Lisa that she had received the distress call 4 days ago and apologized for not getting there sooner. She asked if the station could hold on a little longer, and Lisa promised they would hold as long as necessary and thanked Helen for coming, because they had not believed anyone would make it in time. Helen's expression hardened just slightly, and she told Lisa that no human colony stands alone, and not while she had ships to send. She ordered Lisa to get everyone into the core shelters and stay there because things were about to get messy. The channel closed, and Helen turned to her tactical officer, Lieutenant Craig Morrison, and asked what the Votheri commander was doing. Craig reported that the enemy ships were forming a defensive sphere around the station, like they thought the humans would not risk hitting civilians. Helen said quietly that they were betting wrong and they were about to regret that assumption. She ordered Danny to signal the fleet for battle formation. Delta, with the Valiant taking point and the Hampton and Colorado forming up on the flanks. The lighter frigates would sweep wide and come in from above and below to catch the Votheri in a crossfire. Danny acknowledged and started relaying orders, and Helen watched as her fleet spread out across the tactical display like a living thing that moved with purpose and precision. 110 ships under her command, and every single one crewed by people who trusted her to bring them home alive. Nicole announced that the Votheri commander was hailing them, and Helen told her to put him through. The view screen filled with the scarred reptilian face of Thraktal, and his yellow eyes blazed with fury and something that might have been uncertainty hiding underneath. He announced himself as commander of the Votheri Empire and claimed that this was Votheri territory and the humans were interfering. He told Helen to leave now or he would destroy her entire fleet. Helen stepped forward and clasped her hands behind her back, and when she spoke her voice could have frozen nitrogen. She told Thraktal exactly who she was and informed him that he had attacked a human colony and killed human citizens and laid siege to civilians. She gave him exactly 5 minutes to power down his weapons and drop his shields and prepare to be boarded. If he complied, his crews would be treated as prisoners of war under interstellar law, but if he refused, she would destroy every single one of his ships, and he would be the first to die. Thraktal laughed, or made the sound his species used for laughter, and told her that the Votheri had conquered 17 star systems and crushed fleets twice the size of hers. He said his people did not surrender, especially not to prey species like humans. Helen said 4 minutes, and her expression did not change. Thraktal snarled that they would tear the human ships apart and feast on their bones. Helen said 3 minutes. The Votheri commander cut the transmission, and Danny asked quietly if Helen thought he would surrender. Helen said no, because Thraktal was a true believer who actually thought he could win this fight. She asked Craig for weapon status, and he reported that all railguns were charged and missile batteries were loaded and point defense systems were online. The entire fleet was at full combat readiness. Helen asked for time to target, and Craig said 2 minutes 30 seconds at current speed. Helen allowed herself a thin smile and told the fleet that weapons were free and to target the Votheri command. Ship first, because she wanted Thraktal to watch his fleet die before he joined them. The bridge fell into the focused silence of professionals preparing for battle, and Helen stood at the center like a statue carved from ice and determination. She had been fighting for humanity for 37 years, from pirate skirmishes in the outer colonies to full fleet actions against hostile alien powers. She had seen good people die and made hard choices and sacrificed pieces of herself for the greater good, but she had never failed to protect those under her care, and she was not going to start today. Craig counted down the seconds to weapons. range, and the Vathari fleet opened fire first with plasma bolts and kinetic rounds, streaking across space toward the human ships. Point defense systems came alive and filled the void with tracer fire as they intercepted most of the incoming fire. A few shots got through and splashed against shields, but the fleet held formation and kept advancing. Craig reached zero and announced they were in range. Helen's voice rang clear across the fleet channel as she gave the order to fire. The Valiant shuddered as its main railguns discharged and sent tungsten rounds downrange at speeds that made them nearly invisible. Across the entire Fleet 100, 10 warships unleashed everything they had in one devastating coordinated strike. Missiles streaked through darkness on trails of fire and energy weapons, carved bright lines through space, and railgun rounds moved too fast to see as they punched through. Vathari shields like paper, the first Vathari cruiser simply came apart as multiple railgun rounds hit it simultaneously and the hull ruptured and atmosphere and debris spilled into vacuum. The second cruiser tried to turn and present its armored side, but 3 frigates had already flanked it and poured fire into its engines until they exploded in a brilliant white flash. Helen ordered all batteries to concentrate on the command ship, and Thraktal S vessel became the focus of devastating firepower from 24 human warships. The Vathari commander tried to maneuver and tried to bring his heavy weapons to bear, but he was surrounded and outgunned and completely outmatched. His shields flared bright and then buckled and collapsed under the relentless bombardment. A railgun round from the Valiant punched clean through the bridge section, and Helen watched on the tactical display as the command ship went dark and started tumbling through space like a broken toy. The remaining Vathari ships tried to scatter and run, but human frigates were everywhere, moving faster and cutting off escape routes and herding them back into the killing zone. One by one, the Vathari warships were disabled or destroyed, and their crews either died or surrendered. 8 minutes after the engagement started, it was over. 12 Vathari ships reduced to wreckage or drifting hulks, and not a single human vessel destroyed, though several reported minor shield damage and hull breaches. Helen ordered ceasefire and told search and rescue teams to sweep for survivors and medical teams to prepare for casualties. She had Nicole open a channel to Kepler Station, and Lisa Grant's face appeared again with tears streaming down her cheeks. Lisa tried to speak and couldn't find words and finally just said, "Thank you," over and over. Helen's expression softened slightly, and she told Lisa that her people had held the line and they were safe now. The Third Fleet would leave a garrison until proper defenses could be established, and no one would threaten this colony again. Danny approached with casualty reports and told Helen they had 8 new wounded across the fleet, with none critical and no fatalities on the human side. The Vathari had lost approximately 4,000 crew members, and they were picking up about 600 survivors. Helen nodded and felt the familiar weight of necessary deaths settle on her shoulders. She ordered Danny to see that survivors were treated well and to send a message to Earth Command about what had happened here. Danny asked what message specifically, and Helen turned to look out at the stars beyond the viewport at the scattered colonies where millions of humans were building new lives. She said to tell Earth Command that the Vathari Empire just learned an important lesson. Danny asked what lesson that was. Helen said quietly that humanity protects its own and always would. The battle was over, but the message was just beginning to spread, and soon every species in the galaxy would know what happened when someone threatened human colonists. Admiral Helen Crawford had earned her reputation as the Iron Lady through decades of service and countless battles, but today she had added another chapter to that legend. She had brought 110 ships across 16 light years to save 3,000 people she had never met, and she had done it without hesitation. That was the promise of human unity, and that was the standard she held herself and her fleet to. No colony too distant, and no outpost too small, and no group of humans too insignificant to fight for. News of the Battle of Kepler Station spread through human space within days, and through the wider galaxy within weeks, like ripples spreading across a vast pond. On Earth, in the marble halls of government, people celebrated, and on colony worlds from the nearest to the farthest reaches, humans felt something they had not felt before, which was the certainty that they were not alone. In alien capitals across Dozens of Star Systems leaders and military commanders watched the battle footage over and over, trying to understand how 12 warships had been destroyed in 8 minutes. In the Imperial Palace on Voth Prime, the scarred and ancient world that served as the Vothri capital High Commander, Zarkin sat in his war room watching the recordings for the 15th time. The tactical display showed his ships forming their defensive sphere, and then showed the human fleet spreading out with perfect precision, and then showed the massacre that followed. 12 capital ships with experienced crews and heavy armor had lasted 8 minutes against the human Third Fleet, 4,000 warriors dead and commander Thraktal killed in the opening salvo, and the humans had suffered 18 minor injuries. Zarkin's clawed hand scraped against the obsidian table, and he hissed that this could not be accurate. Around him his Air Council sat in uncomfortable silence because they had all verified the recordings from multiple sources. General Krathvin, who carried scars from 100 victories, leaned forward and confirmed that the humans had come with overwhelming force, and their weapons technology was more advanced than the Vothri had anticipated. Their tactics had been flawless, and their execution had been merciless. The High Commander demanded to know everything about the human admiral who had commanded this attack. An aide activated a holographic display that showed Admiral Helen Crawford in her dark blue uniform with gray hair and hard eyes that seemed to stare through the hologram itself. The aide recited her service record of 37 years and 42 major engagements with 0 defeats. Humans called her the Iron Lady, and intelligence suggested she was considered one of their finest commanders. Zarkin studied the image of this small, soft creature with no natural weapons or armor, who had destroyed 12 of his ships like they were nothing. He asked what the War Council knew about overall human military capabilities, and Krathvin brought up fleet deployment maps that showed 6 primary human fleets with approximately 800 capital ships total spread across 23 colony worlds. Their technology was comparable or superior to Vothori systems in most areas, and their industrial capacity was substantial. Zarkin repeated the number slowly because 800 capital ships meant the Vothri had provoked an enemy with 4 times their total military strength. Krathvin reminded him quietly that Thraktal had believed the station would be an easy target because it was lightly defended and far from Earth. The High Commander roared that Thraktal had been a fool who poked a sleeping beast and got his entire fleet devoured. He demanded to know how many human colonies the Vothri had raided in the past year, and the silence that followed told him everything. Finally, Krathvin admitted it was 11 small outposts and mining operations, and they had avoided major settlements. Zarkin realized with cold certainty that Admiral Crawford and her fleet were probably compiling a list of every Vothri action against human interests right now. He said they needed to respond because they could not appear weak, but Counselor Vexstar, the oldest member of the War Council, spoke up carefully. The ancient warrior suggested that perhaps they should consider a different approach because the humans had demonstrated they could and would defend their territory with overwhelming force. The Vothri had other targets and other systems to expand into, so why waste strength against an enemy that had proven so capable? The High Commander asked if Vexstar was suggesting they run and abandon their claim to that entire sector. Vexstar said carefully that he was suggesting they survive because the humans had sent 1 fleet to rescue 1 station. If the Vothri truly provoked them, imagine what 6 fleets would look like descending on Vothri worlds with 4,800 ships. Zarkin wanted to argue and wanted to rage against showing weakness, but he knew Vexstar was right. The Vothri had built their empire by choosing targets they could overwhelm, and the humans were clearly not such a target. He ordered his staff to draft a message to the human government claiming that the attack on Kepler Station had been unauthorized and carried out by a rogue commander who had been dealt with, expressed desire for peaceful relations, and include substantial reparations. Krathvin pointed out that the humans would know it was a lie, and Zarkin snapped that of course they would know, but it gave both sides a way to accept peace without losing face. The humans wanted them to back down, and so they would back down for now. Similar conversations were happening in a dozen other alien capitals as species reassessed their relationship with humanity. The Zarkan collective that had fought a brief war with humans 5 years ago congratulated themselves on their current peace treaty. The Delphian Trade Federation opened new diplomatic channels, eager to maintain good relations with such a powerful military force. The isolationist crystalline communes simply withdrew further into their territory, wanting no part of human conflicts on frontier worlds where multiple species mixed and traded and shared information. A new understanding began to take hold. Humans were no longer the curious newcomers who had stumbled into galactic society barely a generation ago. They were a major power with the technology and the will to protect their interests and their people. That 8-minute battle had rewritten the political calculations of every government within 50 light-years. Back on Kepler Station, repairs were already underway, and Commander Lisa Grant walked through the damaged sections, watching construction crews patch hull breaches and replace blown systems. The Third Fleet had left a garrison of 4 ships and 2,000 Marines to protect the station while permanent defenses were built. Lisa found herself in the observation deck, looking out at the stars and thinking about those desperate hours when death had seemed certain. A young Marine appeared beside her and introduced himself as Private Ryan Hughes and said he was part of the garrison that Admiral Crawford had personally selected. He looked out at the same view and commented that it was beautiful and hard to believe how close they had come to losing everything. Lisa agreed and asked if the Admiral had given them any specific instructions. Ryan said that Crawford had told them to make sure nothing like the siege ever happened again. He mentioned that the Admiral had also sent a message saying that Kepler Station had shown the whole galaxy what human courage looked like. Ryan said he did not think Admiral Crawford was the type to offer empty compliments, and that she probably meant every word. Lisa felt her throat tighten with emotion because she had been so certain they would all die, and the fact that they were alive and safe now still felt unreal. Ryan gestured at the stars and said, "They were millions of miles from Earth out here alone in the darkness." But they were not really alone, were they? Because when the call went out, the fleet had come. Every single ship had come across 16 light-years to save people they had never met. Lisa agreed quietly and realized that was the real message of the Battle of Kepler Station. It was not about the tactical superiority or the advanced weapons, or even the destruction of the Vitheri fleet. The real message was simpler and more powerful than any of that. The message was that humanity would answer the call no matter how far or how dangerous or how impossible it seemed. No colony was too distant, and no outpost too small, and no group of humans too few to matter. That was the promise, and Admiral Crawford had proven it was not just words. News reports across human space picked up the story, and civilians who had felt vulnerable on distant frontier worlds suddenly felt safer. Military recruitment numbers surged as young people wanted to be part of the force that protected others. Political leaders spoke about human unity and the importance of maintaining strong defenses. But for the 3,000 colonists on Kepler Station, the meaning was more personal and more profound. They had faced certain death and believed no one would come in time to save them. They had prepared to die fighting rather than surrender to slavery. And then Admiral Helen Crawford had arrived with 110 warships and ended the threat in 8 minutes. That kind of rescue and that kind of commitment left a mark that would never fade. The galaxy had watched and learned, and recalculated their understanding of humanity. The Vitheri had learned that humans protect their own with overwhelming force. Other species had learned that humanity was a valuable ally and a dangerous enemy. And humans themselves had learned that their government and their military would move heaven and earth to protect even the smallest colony on the farthest frontier. They had believed no one would come, but Earth's most feared Armada had arrived, and the message echoed across 1,000 worlds. Humanity stood together, and no threat would break that unity. 3 months after the Battle of Kepler Station, the effects of that 8-minute engagement continued to ripple outward through human space and beyond, in ways both expected and surprising. In the small farming town of New Portland on the colony world of Franklin's Hope, a young woman named Kate Morrison sat in a military recruiting office staring at enlistment papers spread across the desk in front of her. Sergeant Marcus Bell, who had seen 20 years of service, watched her with patient eyes and asked if she was certain about her decision, because the Space Navy was not an easy life with long deployments and hard work and the very real possibility of danger far from home. Kate thought about her brother, Craig, who served as tactical officer aboard the Valiant and who had sent messages home describing the battle, and Admiral Crawford's leadership and the feeling of protecting people who could not protect themselves. She thought about her family who had farmed this colony world for 3 generations, building something good from raw frontier land. She picked up the pen and signed her name, and told Sergeant Bell that she was certain because her family had built a home here, and now it was time someone from their family stood watch for others who were doing the same thing on distant worlds. The sergeant smiled and countersigned the papers and welcomed her to the United Earth Space Navy. Similar scenes were playing out across 24 colony worlds as recruitment numbers surged in the wake of Kepler Station. Young people who had felt helpless and exposed on the frontier now wanted to be part of HFY force that had demonstrated such overwhelming commitment to protecting human lives. The Navy was having to expand training facilities to handle the influx, and that meant more ships and more crews and a stronger defense for every colony. On Earth, at the Naval Academy in San Diego, Commander Patricia Hughes stood before a classroom full of cadets and told them that the Battle of Kepler Station was now required study material for all tactical courses. She wanted them to pay close attention to Admiral Crawford's approach because it was not just about having superior numbers or better weapons. The Admiral had positioned her fleet to minimize risk to civilians while maximizing damage to the enemy, and she had ended the engagement as quickly as possible to prevent any chance of the Vothery breaking through to the station. A cadet in the front row raised her hand and asked what Commander Hughes thought was the most important lesson from the battle. Patricia considered the question carefully and said that preparedness and decisive action save lives. The Votheri had thought they had time to slowly break down the station's defenses, but Admiral Crawford had not given them that time. She had arrived with overwhelming force and ended the threat immediately. In warfare, hesitation and half measures cost lives, while decisive, overwhelming action preserves them. In the diplomatic quarter of Geneva, where Earth's government handled relations with other species, Ambassador Gregory Foster met with representatives from the Delphian Trade Federation. The Delphians were tall, blue-skinned traders who had maintained good relations with humanity for over 20 years, and now they wanted to formalize and expand those ties. Trademaster Velener spoke in the musical tones of his species and said that the demonstration at Kepler Station had been most impressive, and the Federation wished to discuss mutual defense agreements. Gregory listened carefully as Velener explained that the Votheri were not the only aggressive species in this region of space. There were raiders and pirates and opportunistic empires who preyed on the weak. The Delphian Federation had substantial wealth but limited military power, and they would pay well for assurance that their trade routes and colonies would receive protection, similar to what humanity provided its own people. It was a delicate question because Earth had been careful not to become a galactic police force, but strategic alliances had clear value. The ambassador promised to bring the proposal to the Government Council and said he believed they could find mutually beneficial terms. As the Delphians departed, Gregory's assistant Sophie Clark approached with a datapad showing 6 more meeting requests. The Arcanian sovereignty wanted to discuss joint military exercises, and the Talshani Republic was proposing technology exchanges. Even the isolationist crystalline communes had sent a message expressing interest in opening diplomatic channels for the first time in decades. Sophie noted that all of this was happening because of one Battle and Gregory rubbed his tired eyes and agreed. They had proven they protect their own, and now every species in the sector was reassessing their relationship with humanity. Some wanted to be allies, and some wanted to ensure they never became enemies, and some, like the Vothari, were scrambling to avoid further conflict. The Vothari had sent formal apologies and substantial reparations, and withdrawn their ships from several disputed border zones. Intelligence reports suggested internal struggles within Vothari leadership about whether to seek revenge or accept the new reality of human power. Admiral Crawford had prepared for both possibilities by keeping the Third Fleet on high alert and conducting regular patrols through the sector. Additional defensive platforms had been deployed to frontier colonies, and a new rapid response protocol ensured that any distress call would receive support within days instead of weeks. Helen Crawford herself sat in her ready room aboard the Valiant, reviewing reports and drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Captain Danny Price knocked and entered carrying a bottle of expensive whiskey and 2 glasses. He said he thought the Admiral could use a break after 3 months of constant work. Helen leaned back and allowed herself a rare moment of relaxation and asked if that was the good whiskey. Danny confirmed it was the very good whiskey saved for special occasions and poured 2 glasses. He offered a toast to Kepler Station and to the people they had saved. They drank, and the whiskey burned pleasantly, and Helen felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. Danny mentioned that people back on Earth were writing songs about the battle, and he had heard one in a bar during their last shore leave. The melody was terrible, he said, but the sentiment was genuine. Helen made a face and said that was exactly what she did not need, which was more attention. Danny pointed out that she was a hero to 3,000 colonists and to every human on the frontier and to the Navy itself. She should embrace it instead of fighting it. Helen insisted she had simply done her job the same as always. Danny refilled both glasses and said it was more than just a job because she had saved 3,000 lives and sent a message to the entire galaxy. The government wanted to give her commendations, and Fleet Admiral Rodriguez wanted her to speak at the next officers' conference. There were even rumors about naming the new Dreadnought class after her. Helen grimaced and said she would speak if required, but she was not comfortable with ships being named after living officers because it felt like bad luck. Danny promised to pass that message along and then asked more seriously how she was holding up because command could be lonely, especially after events like Kepler Station. Helen was quiet for a long moment, staring into her glass. She admitted she kept thinking about Thrakdal and that moment right before the battle started when he realized he had made a terrible mistake. When he understood he was not the apex predator he believed himself to be. Danny asked if she had regrets, and Helen said no, because Thrakdal had made his choice when he attacked civilians. But she wondered how many other species were making the same miscalculation. Right now, seeing humans as soft and unprepared and easy targets, because they preferred diplomacy to violence. Danny said then they would keep showing them otherwise. Not by seeking fights, but by being ready when fights came to them. That was what Helen had built with the Third Fleet, which was a force that protects and deters and demonstrates humanity's capability and resolve. Helen raised her glass and said they should toast to the Third Fleet then. May they never have to prove themselves this way again, but may they always be ready if they must. They drank together in companionable silence, and Helen felt the weight on her shoulders ease slightly. The galaxy was vast and filled with unknowns and potential threats, but humanity was no longer vulnerable or alone. They had strength and courage and the will to protect their own. Kepler Station had proven that, and the message had been received across 1,000 worlds. Admiral Helen Crawford had made a promise not just to one colony but to every human settlement among the stars. No matter how distant or how dangerous or how impossible it seemed, she would bring the fleet when they called. That promise was now being tested and expanded as other species sought alliances and protection. The responsibilities were growing, but so was humanity's capacity to meet them. They had believed no one would come, but the Armada had arrived and would arrive again as many times as necessary, because that was the standard Helen had set, and the example she had given. The galaxy was learning that humanity kept its promises and protected its people and stood by its allies. Those lessons would shape the future in ways both large and small for years to come. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler Station, the political landscape of the entire sector had transformed in ways that would have seemed impossible before that fateful 8-minute engagement in the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Commerce Consortium, where dozens of species gathered to negotiate trade and settle disputes. Ambassador Gregory Foster stood before representatives from 15 different civilizations. The chamber was built to accommodate various atmospheric requirements and physical forms, and hummed with translation technology as his words were rendered into multiple languages. Simultaneously, Gregory announced that the United Earth government was proposing the formation of a mutual defense compact where member species would agree to collective security arrangements and coordinated responses to piracy and illegal warfare. Each member would maintain sovereignty and independent military command, but would agree to support others facing existential threats. A Delphian representative stood and asked the obvious question, which was whether Earth would truly commit military resources to defend non-human worlds. Given that Kepler Station had been a human colony attacked by a known hostile power, the ambassador met her eyes and said the compact worked both ways because humanity expected others to commit resources to defend human colonies as well. But yes, he confirmed if a member species faced the kind of aggression the Vothari had displayed at Kepler Station, then humanity would respond. They were not proposing this from altruism alone, but from practical recognition that stability benefited everyone and aggressive empires that went unchecked eventually threatened them all. Hours of debate followed, with some species embracing the proposal enthusiastically while others worried about being pulled into conflicts not of their choosing. By the end of the session, 12 species had signed preliminary agreements for what became known as the Frontier Alliance. It represented the most significant shift in galactic politics in decades and placed humanity at the center of a new security architecture. Aboard the UES Valiant conducting training exercises near the colony world of New Horizon, Admiral Helen Crawford reviewed the diplomatic developments with mixed feelings as she sat in her ready room with Captain Danny Price and Commander Lisa Grant, who had accepted a position as the Fleet's Civilian Liaison Officer. Lisa spoke first, saying this was what they had fought for at Kepler Station, which was making sure no colony ever faced that kind of siege alone. The Alliance could prevent future attacks just by existing. Danny countered that it could also drag them into conflicts they might otherwise avoid, and asked what would happen when two member species had a border dispute or when one member committed an action another found objectionable. Alliance politics could get complicated very quickly. Helen nodded slowly and acknowledged both points were valid. She asked Lisa what the mood was like among the frontier colonies since she had been working with them directly. Lisa reported that people felt safer than they had in years and recruitment remained strong, and infrastructure projects that had been considered too risky were now moving forward. But there was also a sense of responsibility, like humanity had proven something at Kepler Station and now had to live up to that standard. The Admiral agreed quietly and said the galaxy had watched them respond to a threat with overwhelming force and precise execution. They had seen humanity protect its people without hesitation, and that created expectations not just from allies but from their own citizens. They could not afford to fail those expectations. A communication alert interrupted their conversation, and Lieutenant Nicole Sanders reported a priority transmission from Earth Command marked urgent. Helen told her to route it to the ready room, and Fleet Admiral Rodriguez appeared on the screen with his usual serious expression. He informed Helen that the Arcanian Sovereignty had just reported an attack on one of their mining outposts in the Sigma Draconis system. Pirates heavily armed and demanding tribute, with 2,000 Arcanian workers trapped, and the pirates claiming to have planted explosives throughout the facility. The Arcanians were signatories to the Frontier Alliance as of that morning. Helen was already standing and asking how many ships they needed. Rodriguez said the Arcanians were not asking for ships, but asking for her, specifically because the pirates had heard about Kepler Station and the sovereignty government, believed her reputation might make them reconsider their position. Danny muttered that it could also make them more desperate. Helen asked when the attack had begun, and Rodriguez said 4 hours ago, with the nearest Arcanian military ships 3 days away and the destroyer U.S. Phoenix in that sector, but just 1 ship. Against an estimated 5 pirate vessels, the Admiral asked for time to Sigma Draconis at maximum speed, and Danny was already calculating. He said 18 hours with the whole fleet or 12 with just the fast attack group. Rodriguez informed them the pirates had given a deadline of 24 hours before they started killing hostages. Helen's expression hardened because this was the first real test of the Alliance, and failure here could unravel the entire compact before it truly began. Success would prove the promise of Kepler Station. Extended beyond humanity's own colonies, she ordered Danny to prepare the fast attack group with 8 ships and best crews. She told Lisa to coordinate with the Arcanian government for full details on the outpost layout and the hostages and everything known about the pirates. She had Nicole contact Captain Jennifer Burke on the Phoenix with orders to maintain visual contact with the pirate ships but not engage unless hostages were in immediate danger. Rodriguez gave her full operational authority to take whatever actions necessary to protect the hostages, even if it meant destroying the pirate vessels. 12 hours later, the fast attack group dropped out of jump space at the edge of Sigma Draconis, and Helen settled into her command chair asking for status reports. Craig Morrison at Tactical confirmed 5 vessels in orbit around the mining outpost, matching known pirate configurations from the outer rim. The Phoenix was holding position at a safe distance, and hostages were confirmed alive on the facility. Helen ordered communications to hail the lead pirate vessel. The view screen showed a rough-looking alien of a species Helen did not immediately recognize, with sharp angular features and aggressive body language. The pirate announced this was none of humanity's concern and told them to leave or the explosives would be detonated, killing everyone on the outpost. Helen leaned forward and identified herself as Admiral Crawford of the United Earthspace Navy. The Arcanian sovereignty was an ally of humanity, which made their people her concern. The pirate had one chance to surrender by powering down weapons and transporting hostages to safety and preparing for arrest. The pirate's expression twisted into what might have been amusement, and he said they knew the famous Admiral Crawford might come, which was why they had the explosives. She was not at Kepler Station anymore, where she could simply destroy the enemy without consequences. Here she could not blow them away without killing everyone she came to save. He demanded 10 million credits transferred immediately or everyone would die. Helen's face showed no emotion as she asked Craig if they had located the explosives. Craig confirmed they were using standard mining charges placed at 6 structural points throughout the facility and not particularly sophisticated. Helen asked Nicole to connect her with the Arcanian foreman on the outpost. A terrified alien appeared on a split screen, begging her not to let the pirates kill them all. Helen told him calmly she was sending technical specifications for disarming the charges, which were simple devices, and asked if he could access them. The foreman said yes, he thought so, but the pirates would see them on security feeds. Helen said they would create a distraction and told him to stand by. She switched back to the pirate commander and told him fine, they would transfer 10 million credits, but needed 30 minutes to arrange it with banking protocols and authorization codes. The pirate looked suspicious and accused her of stalling. Helen asked flatly if he wanted the money or not. After a pause, the pirate agreed to 30 minutes and not a second more. The channel closed and Helen immediately switched to tactical channels, ordering all ships to prepare precision strikes targeting engines and weapons on each pirate vessel. The goal was to disable, not destroy, because she wanted crews alive for interrogation. Craig calculated firing solutions and locked them in. Helen contacted Captain Burke and told her to position for hostage extraction. The moment the explosives were disarmed, she opened another channel to the Arcanian foreman and explained that in exactly 28 minutes, every light on the outpost would go dark. He would have 90 seconds before backup power engaged to reach the explosives and disable them using the specifications her technical team was sending. The foreman protested that 90 seconds was not much time even with instructions. Helen told him to get his best people positioned near each charge point now and move the instant the lights went out for 27 minutes. Helen watched the clock while her crew prepared and the Arcanian workers slowly positioned themselves, trying to appear casual. The pirates, confident in their leverage, did not seem to notice the preparations. Helen opened a channel to the entire attack group, reminding them that precision was critical, because they needed to disable the pirates without giving them time to detonate anything. At exactly 28 minutes the lights on the mining outpost went dark and Arcanian workers moved with desperate speed toward the explosives, guided by technical specifications. 8 human warships opened fire with surgical precision and railgun rounds crippled pirate engines while energy weapons destroyed weapon mounts. In 30 seconds all 5 pirate vessels were disabled and drifting helpless. On the outpost, workers frantically disconnected wires and disabled charges one after another, racing against the backup power timer. Craig reported they were struggling with the 6th charge because the access panel was jammed. Helen ordered Captain Burke to prepare emergency transport to get as many people out as possible if that charge detonated. The Arcanian workers pulled at the jammed panel with everything they had, and it finally gave way with seconds remaining. Hands reached for wires and disconnected them, following the diagram exactly. The backup lights came on and the 6th charge sat disarmed in trembling hands. Craig confirmed all charges neutralized and Helen ordered the Phoenix to begin transporting workers to safety immediately. Over 10 minutes every hostage was evacuated, while the pirates realized their leverage was gone and their ships were disabled. They had no choice but surrender. Helen ordered the pirate crews secured and prepared for transport to Alliance judicial facilities. She told her staff to send full reports to the Arcanian government and Earth Command and to get the rescued workers medical attention and hot food. Danny approached with a slight smile and commented that it was another quick engagement, because she seemed to prefer her battles short and decisive. Helen replied that quick engagements gave enemies less time to complicate things. Lisa, who had watched from the bridge, looked stunned and said Helen made it look easy, but if anything had gone wrong, the consequences would have been catastrophic. Helen said quietly that nothing went wrong because the workers were brave and her crew was precise, and the pirates made the mistake of thinking humanity would not risk everything to save people they had never met. News of the rescue at Sigma Draconis spread even faster than Kepler Station had, because now the pattern was clear. The Frontier Alliance had passed its first test and humanity had proven its commitment to collective defense was real and not just diplomatic language. Admiral Crawford had demonstrated again that threats to Alliance members would be met with swift, overwhelming, and precise response. 3 more species requested Alliance membership in the following weeks. Piracy in frontier sectors dropped dramatically as word spread that attacking Alliance members meant facing Earth's fleet. The Vothari Empire continued avoiding any actions that might provoke human retaliation. A new order was taking shape among the stars, built not on conquest but on mutual defense and shared security. It was not perfect and challenges remained, but it represented real progress. From the lawless frontier that had existed before, Admiral Helen Crawford continued, doing what she had always done, which was protecting those who could not protect themselves and responding to threats with decisive action and proving that humanity would never abandon those in need. They had believed no one would come, whether at Kepler Station or Sigma Draconis or wherever the next crisis emerged. But Earth's most feared Armada arrived every time, because that was the promise and that was the reality the galaxy had learned to believe.